sorry not to be in the room. Actually, it's a bit weird to do a lecture from your home office, but I hope it will work well. And today, the topic of the lecture, as Liliana said, will be about dynamical downscaling mainly, but I'll try to put it in the context of extreme events. And first, maybe just a little bit on my background. I've got my PhD in 2011 now, so quite some time ago. And during my PhD and since that, I've been working on questions related to climate change and mostly using climate models, global climate models and regional climate models. So that's why I was chosen to give this lecture today. And before diving into dynamical downscaling, I thought I should talk a little bit about the Nobel in physics, because this year climate science and actually climate models were got the Nobel Prize, and I think it's quite something. So this workshop is really timely because we learn about climate model right after they got the Nobel Prize. So I think it's really cool. And one more digression also, because I think this workshop is even more timely, because recently the working group 1 of the IPCC released the last report. And what's I think really interesting in our case is that, of course, they say that it is indisputable that human activities are causing climate change. But they say then that making extreme climate events, including heat wave, heavy rainfall, and drought, more frequent and severe. So extreme events we talk about it more and more. And I think it's quite, very interesting that we have this lecture today, and tomorrow the attribution of the extreme events by Carly. And one more thing that also can be interesting for some of you, depending on what you do in your PhD, although the IPCC is working on a really global scale, they're also trying to be more regional. And this time they have developed regional fact sheets on many different regions in Europe, in the world, including Europe, but you have America, Africa, and they try to put together a summary of what are the current and future impact of climate change in different regions. And depending on what you do in your PhD, that can be quite useful. So I put a link on that at the end of my PowerPoint that I guess you will get after. But you have a summary of references you could use, but you also have these fact sheets that I think can be useful depending on what you do in your PhD. So now, I don't know if you have seen the schedule, but I have tried to, so we'll have some, a short theoretical lecture, but hopefully it will be a lot of practical tasks, and I hope everything will work smoothly. I also try to put some breaks, so you have some time to refresh and be ready for the next step. But so first we'll do a lecture from 9 to 9:45. I will try to give you the background of dynamical downscaling and to explain you a little bit how we will work in the tasks that will come in the rest of the day. And then we'll have a break of 15 minutes from 9:45 to 10. And then the first practical task before lunch. And before lunch, we'll also have a discussion just to see if everything worked fine. And if you had questions, and just to see what we have learned during the first task. Then lunch, then 2 practical tasks, and again, a discussion for finishing the day. And also we'll try to talk more about the application for regional climate models. But before diving into the lecture, I was wondering if you could go in the chat, maybe put your name and put the topic of your research, just a few words. I don't know, the title of your PhD, just a few words to tell me the topic of your research, because I'm thinking when we go along the task or the application, depending on what you do, I could, maybe target a little bit more the task for you, or maybe give you some useful information. So I just give you a few minutes, and if you could put name and information, then I'll look at that after. Is that possible, Liliana? Or is it easy to write in the chat, because I can't see the chat?
Yes, we will write in the chat. I can read the chat to you, or you can also.
I'll look at it after when we are doing practical tasks. When I'm in the break, I can look at the different topics. Just for me later, I'm thinking that could be helpful.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you. I'll give you a few more minutes and then I'll just start the lecture. Ready? Are you okay, or do you need more time? Well, if I start and you're not ready, just yeah, put something, raise a hand, or I'll see if you're not ready. So for the lecture today, we'll talk about the background for dynamical downscaling. Why did we start doing dynamical downscaling? The advantages of such a tool or technique, and task one is related to that, to the advantages of using dynamical downscaling. And then we'll also talk about the limitation, and task two is related to the limitation later today. Then going to applications, and but we'll talk about applications during the lecture, but during the discussions also during the day. And then, as I said before, I will talk a little bit more about the task, just to start to guide you through the task, even if you have a document for helping you. So the background. So first, you know, like since a long time, since a few decades, we have wanted to represent our climate, the Earth's climate, and because we want to understand better how the climate system works, and we also want to know what will happen in the future, or the likely range of possibilities for the future. And to do that, of course, we have learned a lot from observations, but for understanding some processes, or for looking at the future, you need models. And we've, of course, started by doing climate models, global climate models, and we have tried to represent, I think you have learned about that before, so I won't spend a lot of time on that, but we are trying to represent all sorts of parts of the climate system, and all the processes related to clouds, solar inputs, hydrology, the ocean, mountains, the human influence. So all that are in a climate model, and I think you already know that. And we've done it with global climate models, as I said before. So you have an example here where you see the model representing all the globe with this big square for the spatial resolution. And but slowly we have also started to be more interested about what's happening at the regional scale, at the regional climate. For example, for us in our group at Cicero, looking at impacts. And when you look at the regional climate, you need actually to represent two things. You need still to represent large-scale forcing, so what's happening, as you can see on the left part on Earth, like what's come from really globally, but you also need to look at what's happening regionally. So even if you're looking at the regional climate, you still need inputs from both the large scale and the local scale. So when I say the large scale, I'm thinking about, for example, volcanic eruption, solar activity, or human activity. And another way to say that is that planetary or large-scale forcings and circulation determine the statistics of weather events that characterize the climate of a region. So even if you're looking at a local region, you still need input from the large scale. But you also want to go at the local scale with regional climate models or dynamical downscaling, because as you can see in the map in the middle, regional climates are very complex because the regions is very complex. If you look at Europe, you have mountains, you have the Alps, you have the Pyrenees, you also have agriculture, forest. I mean, you have very different types of complex land use that you can't really see sometimes in a climate model because the grid is too big. If you have a grid of 100 kilometers, it's difficult to capture all these different differences, local differences. So yeah, when you're looking at the regional climate, you really also need to have regional and local scale forcings and circulation, because they modulate the regional climate signal, possibly feeding back to the large scale circulation. So yeah, as I was saying, we used to use global climate models to look at the regional climate, and for some questions we still do it, because, for example, if you have a simple topography, you don't have mountains, and maybe you're looking at temperature, it can still be good to use global climate models. As you can see on the right here, they have increased their resolution along the way. We came from the very coarse grid, 500 kilometers, big square over Europe. Here it's Europe on the little plot. But then, yeah, global climate model have also gone more of a higher spatial resolution. So we've been able to look at the regional climate with them. But we still think that when you want to go on some specific question, you really need to go to a higher spatial resolution. So that's why we're starting to look at regional climate models. Another way to see that maybe it's to look at this plot actually, because here I think you're over Germany, if I remember correctly. And you can see how Germany looks like, or the country looks like if you use the global climate model. So with the blue line, you can see that the country is divided in what, 9 square. So you really don't have a lot of, you cannot really get a lot of complexity. But then if you use a regional climate model, you have a lot of little squares and you can really capture the heterogeneities of the topography, for example. So that will have an impact in the representation of your climate. So as you know, as just said before, yeah, we need tools for producing regional information at a high spatial resolution. And I've talked about dynamical downscaling in the first few slides, but I think yesterday you have talked about statistical downscaling for the lecture of day 1, and that's another really useful tool. They're just complementary. I don't think they're in opposition. And another tool that has been also developed is a stretch grids in global climate models, where you have a higher resolution in one part of the globe, and it goes, the resolution decreases around the rest of the globe. So I've done that during my PhD. If you have more questions, feel free to ask yeah, about that, but it's not the topic of today, but it's also a very useful tool. And it's, for example, very useful when you want to look at tropical cyclones, because they are very dependent on the local scale and the large scale. Yeah, just a little bit more in the background. I think it's the last slide in the background. But yeah, about the methodology behind regional climate models. So as you can see here on the little figure, for the regional climate model, you have a domain over a specific region, for example, Europe. But as I said before, you still need information from the large scale. So you still need to have information coming, for example, from a global climate model, but it can also be observation. But you still need to have input on this large scale to combine information on the large scale and the local scale. And then another way to think about that is that the GCM, the global climate model, simulates the response of the general circulation to the large scale forcing, and the regional climate model simulates the effect of sub GCM grid scale forcing and provides fine scale regional information. So even if you are running your regional climate model, so doing dynamical downscaling on a region, you still get information from the global climate model. So yeah, basically you get the large scale information from the global climate model, and then you get regional and fine scale information with the regional climate model on a specific region. And then you can look at different impacts on water, food, energy, yeah, biodiversity, and many other things. So I thought at this point we could do a little pause just to see if you had questions, if something was not clear on this first part. I don't see the chat, so maybe it's better to yeah, talk or raise a hand if you have questions.
In the chat, there are only the titles of the topics of the PhD thesis. No questions so far.
Okay, good. Well, you can also put questions in the chat along the way. I can also answer them after. But yes, if you have questions, you can also stop me. We have time, so yeah, just tell me if something is not clear. So now we can talk a little bit about the advantages of using such a technique. So of course, the main advantage is that we get a higher spatial resolution, and we can use look at specific questions that require this high spatial resolution. But compared to other techniques, what is good about the dynamical downscaling is that it's based on physics. So it's not an interpolation or a linear regression, or you don't just create information from the large scale information. You're really using physics. You have a model based on equation, that represent the climate at higher spatial resolution. So I think it's that's the main, that's a really big strength of such a technique. What is also good about regional climate modeling, but it's also true for global climate modeling, is that you have a wide variety of applications. So even if today the topic is more looking about climate change and the future and different scenarios, what is good is that you can look at, for example, paleoclimate, so you can go very far in the past, and you can do simulation at very different time scales. So it's a very flexible tool in this sense. And coming back to this idea of high resolution, I thought I would give you an example just to visually see what are the impacts of having such a higher resolution in some regions that require it. So, for example, here we are in Peru, so you have the Andes, and as you know, that's really complex topography, very big mountains, and you can see how the relative changes in precipitation are represented in the global climate model CSM in Peru. So it's the difference between the future and the present climate for the scenario RCP 8.5. You can just know that it's just a quite pessimistic scenario for the future in terms of greenhouse gases emission. So that's what you see in the global climate model. So you have a decrease in precipitation along the coast and an increase inside the continent. But then if you look at what's in the regional climate model, so the regional climate model is called WARF, and the resolution is 50 kilometers. And then you can see how the details are coming, like you have much more detail and even different information. For example, if you look at the northern part of the domain, in the global climate model, you had an increase in precipitation, and now you have a decrease. And if you look also along the coast, the details are very, very different depending on you have much more details in the regional climate model. And that's for 50-kilometer resolution. And if you go even further at 10-kilometer resolution, you can see like really a lot of patterns appearing that we didn't see before. And the reason for that is that if you look at the Andes and the representation of the mountains in the different models, you can see that the mountains are represented very differently between the global climate model and the regional climate model. In the global climate model, the mountain is almost a block, while in the regional climate model, you really start to have much more fine details, and that's why it's explaining the difference we see between the projection for the global climate model and the regional climate model. So that's why I was saying before, when you use regional climate model, you really get much more fine scale information. And you can imagine that for people working in this region, it's very different to get, if you look at impacts on water or on agriculture, it's very different to look at the global climate model versus the regional climate model information. So now we can talk a little bit more about the limitations, because there are limitations to such techniques. That's also why, as I said before, you have different techniques, because they are not perfect, none of them, statistical downscaling, dynamical downscaling, they all have their strengths, but also limitations. So as I said before, the regional climate model gets information from the global climate model, because it needs information on the rest of the globe, but it also needs information to start the simulation. So it's initial condition and lateral boundary condition. So there is this arrow coming from the global climate model to the regional climate model, but the feedback is not true. You don't have information going from the regional climate to the global climate model. And that's quite a limitation, because, I mean, it depends also on what you're looking at, but again, coming back to this idea of using stretched grids, as I talked about it before, that's their big strength in this technique, in this other technique. It's because you have this feedback between the region and the global information. So again, for example, for tropical cyclones, that's something that is really, really useful. So that's why some people, are, for example, for tropical cyclones, we are more interested in using the stretched grids compared to the regional climate models. Another limitation also of the regional climate model is again coming back to this issue that you get information from the climate model going in the regional climate model. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but yeah, you have this area where the regional climate model is treating the information coming in from the global climate model, the boundary conditions. And as you can imagine, you go, as you can see, from a very coarse resolution to a very fine resolution. So that can be quite an issue for the model to have this area of transition. And that can be a limitation. So for example, when you put your domain, when you choose where you want to work on with the regional climate model, you should avoid putting the boundaries, the limit of your domain on mountains. It doesn't mean that you won't have mountains in the domain, but you should have the mountains embedded in the domain and not at the limit. For Europe, you also try to avoid Greenland. So you need to be quite careful when you set up your domain. And you also need to be careful with physics, but we'll talk about that in task 2. And the main big limitation of regional climate modeling is that it's very computationally demanding, because as you can imagine, you go at a very high spatial resolution. So yeah, you need to compute the results at high spatial resolution and high temporal resolution. So it's very computationally demanding compared to global climate models. Do you have questions? I can also stop a few minutes here.
There is one question.
Yes.
How accurate can global climate model predict El Nino?
I mean, that's El Nino in general. I think we have done a lot of progress in El Nino, but there are still some biases. Also with global climate models, a big difference is the input you use for sea surface temperature, so for representing the ocean. So I think we have got really better in representing El Nino, but it's still something where I think in many applications or many parts of the climate system, we need to improve, because, for example, you have also different type of El Niños. So sometimes we are also better at representing one type of El Nino compared to another. So I would say that we've improved a lot because we improved our representation of the ocean. But yes, there is still some way to go. But Carly, if you know more about El Nino than me. But yeah, I worked in the US with someone working specifically on that, and he was complaining, but he was also really happy that the model got way better than before. Other questions, or should I continue?
No more questions in the chat. Hoće neko da pita nešto? Ne? Thank you. No more questions.
I should add also something is that when you look at El Nino, I mean, there are many different ways to use look at El Nino or any climate process. But for example, we understand much more the connection between El Nino and many of the parts of the climate system. So for me, for example, again, talking about tropical cyclones, we have a very, very good understanding of if you are in an El Nino or La Nina phase, what's happening in the different basins, tropical cyclone basins in the world. So I guess we can still understand better or simulate better El Nino, but we really have a good understanding of how El Nino is impacting the climate system in general. Okay, so applications, and that's the last part of the short lecture, and yeah, and then I'll talk about the task, and we'll have a short break, and we'll go in those tasks. So applications for regional climate models. Actually, maybe the first application that we are still doing now, it's to continue developing models and doing a lot of validation, because you still need to test the model, compare it with observation, and look at how the chemistry or different parts of the model are represented. So yeah, part of what we do in the model is actually to test it and compare it with observation or with other climate models. And another thing that we also do with this model is to do model coupling. So if they represent the atmosphere, we can couple them with ocean models, we can couple them with ice sheet models, you can have all sorts of coupling to have a better representation of a specific region. But what's maybe a little bit more interesting for here is that we do also a lot of process studies. So you can also want to look at land-atmosphere interactions, for example. So it can be looking at climate change and vegetation or afforestation, deforestation, all these questions that are actually really important for decision makers, because you want to know what's happening when you do afforestation, what's the impact on the climate, or the contrary, what is the impact of the climate on vegetation. Again, tropical cyclones, but we also have ocean, sea ice, atmosphere interaction. So there are all sorts of process studies that you can do with this model. And even more interesting for today, you can do climate change and impact studies on many different regions in the world. So you can look at different scenarios for the future. So I don't know, here you have 5 different scenarios for the future with, I think you looked at that before, but a more sustainable scenario, sustainable with more rapid growth, a scenario more business as usual, where we continue on the same path. So you have all these different scenarios, and you can look at these scenarios and see what will be the impact on land use or on cities in the world, or on mountain glaciers, so on everything basically. And then you can also look at, for example, extreme events. So you could imagine that you will look at how heat wave will impact cities in the future for different scenarios. So that's a lot of the work that we actually do at Cicero in our group, in the impact group. And yeah, there are many combinations and things you can do with this regional climate model. And I'll finish this part with an example where we look at, it's a project called Exhaustion, and we look at health impacts of heat stress and air pollution. Actually, yeah, many people in the team are doing more than me on this topic, but I think it's quite interesting that that's what I wanted to say before, that you can look at very different scenarios and different type of events and different parts of the world, but then you can really go in the local impact, so looking at health impacts, for example. So it's a very powerful tool to look at a large range of local impacts in different regions in the world, and better understand what could happen in the future. So that's all for the short lecture for this morning, and now I will try to explain the task. But if you have questions, and for the application, we will talk much more about it along the day, and also in the discussion at the end of the day. In the discussion, I'm planning to talk a little bit more about some projects we are doing at Cicero, if you are interested, or we can just have a discussion on the different tasks, if you prefer. Yeah. Do you have other questions? I guess it's. Yeah, I don't know if I can see the chat.
Yeah, Rob actually raised his hand.
Yeah.
Yes, Rob, please.
Morning, Anne-Sophie.
Hi.
Morning, everyone else. My question is quite a practical one. So you started your talk making the very important point that regional climate modelling and statistical downscaling are complementary tools. And I think that's a view that I share, certainly. So I'd be interested to hear what you think are the situations when you might prefer to use a regional climate model instead of a statistical downscaling model, just to help the audience as a whole, the group, to understand when you go to the toolbox and you pick the regional climate model, and when you go to the toolbox and you pick the statistical downscaling model. So just quite a practical but big question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And if you have an answer to that, because I imagine you have some thoughts about that, I would be happy to hear your thoughts. I think so. In the past, I mean, I've been using much more regional climate modeling or dynamical downscaling, And usually we were using that because we were using at an entire region at a domain. I mean, even if it's a smaller region than the globe, it was still Europe or Africa, or I don't know, we were still focusing on something that can be considered quite a large domain. So even if you get fine scale information, you're still not getting to the point of being at a specific point in Europe. And usually the people in my group in the US who are doing statistical downscaling, they were looking really at a specific city or point somewhere in the US, for example. And in this sense, I think statistical downscaling was really powerful because they could really get really fine scale information on a very specific location. While when you do regional climate downscaling or dynamical downscaling, you're usually looking at quite a bigger region. So I think it's, and also, I mean, I was saying statistical downscaling, dynamical downscaling, it's quite computationally, you know, resource. Yeah, you need a lot of resource. But dynamical, statistical downscaling, I think it's much faster and yeah, you can do it much quicker because you're usually looking at one specific location. But I would be happy to hear what you think, Rob.
Yeah, thank you. That, I mean, that's exactly how I see it as well, that the key strength of the dynamical downscaling is giving us this larger contextual view. So you can see the city within its broader landscape and the interactions between the climate systems at a regional scale, rather than necessarily within an individual city or park within the city. And I think also the point you make about the different computational requirements. So in Europe and North America, we benefit from great computing resources that allow us to run these more sophisticated models. But there are many parts of the world where those resources don't exist. And so simpler, less computationally demanding, less technical tools like statistical downscaling might be a good entry point, and I stress entry point, to get people on the way to understanding their risks and opportunities from climate change. So I think we see the world exactly in the same way there. Thank you.
Cool, feel better. Okay, is there other questions?
No, there aren't any questions in the chat, and no questions so far.
Okay, good. So now, yeah, we have 10 minutes, and I think it will be plenty because, yeah, you have a document for explaining how we will work with the different tasks. But basically, I thought that I would create 3 tasks today just to illustrate what we have seen in the lecture now. Because, yeah, seeing it in the lecture is very theoretical, but doing these small exercises, you could see really what I mean by some of the advantages of limitation or application I've been talking about in the lecture. And what will happen, so this morning we'll have the first practical task. And you'll have a directory called day2, I think. And this day2 directory, you will find a Word document for guiding you through the different steps of each task. And in day2, you will find 3 directories. So logically, I call them task 1, task 2, and task 3. And in each of these directories, you will find a Python script. So for the first task, it's called script_task1.py. So yeah, the idea is that every time for each task, you'll have a Python code that is prepared for you. Normally, if everything goes well, you just have to do Python -i script, and the script will run, and you'll get some figures. And every time you get some figures, I have in the Word document, I have tried to put some questions for you to think about what you are seeing, think about why you think maybe there are differences or things that are common between the plots. And if it's really easy for you because you code all the time, there are additional tasks that you can do. So you don't have to do them, but if you want to change the area you're looking at, if you want to look at another variable, you are optional things that you can do. And yeah, the thing I have been thinking is that I will look at what you are doing in your PhD while there is a break, but Python is a tool that is required for a lot of jobs now. I mean, for research, but outside research, because it's a free software. So I was thinking, if you have this little script, maybe you can reuse them later if you need them. And also what's good with this script is that they're using climate data as input, and climate data are usually in the same shape. So if you have this script, maybe you can keep it, and yeah, one day maybe it will be useful, maybe sooner than later. So yeah, the next step, yeah, I don't have much more of that. It's just yeah, looking at this Word document and starting the steps. And if you want, you can take we can take a break until 10. And then we can start with the practical task. And just one more thing before finishing. At the end of this PowerPoint, as I said before, I put additional literature on dynamical downscaling on different topics. You know, where we are now, what we have learned, what is the impact of the increasing spatial resolution, and different applications from projects that we have done at Cicero or in different other institutes. But just to, if you're interested and you need more background, you can look at these articles. They're usually they're supposed to be good articles. And then depending on what you do in your PhD, if you work with climate change and you want to have the latest reports on climate change, regional impacts, climate change and land, climate change and biodiversity, I'll look again at what you are doing. But yeah, these reports have been released in 2021 and 2020. So you have really like the latest information on climate change and its impacts. So I thought that could be useful for PhD students. So yeah, we can start again at 10. Do you have questions, or is there something that is not clear?
No questions in the chat. So we can have a break until 10.
Yeah.
Okay. And we will be back ready for the practical tasks.
Sounds good. See you soon.
See you.
Okay.
And we can continue with the practical.
Yeah, good. Maybe first, because I think there are a few more people that I didn't see before. So if you didn't put your topic, the topic of your PhD in the chat, please do it, because it's quite useful to see what you are doing. I mean, I said before in the lecture that we were more interested by climate change, but I saw that someone is doing paleoclimate. So actually, it's a whole range of activities. So yeah, if you can just put the topic of your PhD in the chat, that's quite useful. So now we'll start with task 1. So following the lecture, the first part of the lecture was about the advantages of using regional climate modeling or dynamical downscaling. And this first task is exactly to look at that, to think about those questions like why do we use a regional climate model versus global climate model? When do we do that? Because we still use global climate models in many different applications. So yeah, you'll have this task to really think about these questions. What are the advantages of such a technique? So I'll go down in the so I'm actually looking at the document that you should have. It's a Word document where I have tried to guide you through the task. So yeah, you'll go in day 2. And as I said before, you'll have this directory called task 1. And in task 1, you'll have a Python script, and you need to run this script doing Python -i script _ task1.py, but everything is written in the document. And then you'll get figures, and then you can look at these figures, hopefully. And there are some questions just coming after, you can see in the document, and you can start about thinking about this question, and we can talk about it at 11:30. If you're done with that, because it's basically running a Python script. So hopefully if there is if all the options and everything is working, you can do additional tasks. And I tried to be as descriptive as I could in the additional tasks. So if you want to look at Europe instead of Serbia, where where should you modify the code. If you want to look at the result for another global climate model, I also try, I'm showing you now, but yeah, I've been trying to really indicate you where you should modify the code. So I don't know what is your level of coding. So for some people, I imagine it's very easy. For others, it might be more complicated, but I'm here to help you and guide you in the chat, or you can just ask me here. So, and I think Biliana and other people will be here to help also. So yeah, if you have any questions, please ask. I'm here to help. So yeah, you can look at task 1, and you can do it on your own, but you can be small groups, because I think for doing the plots, maybe you can be on your own, but for discussing what you see, it might be more interesting to be in a group of students, 2, 3, 4, it doesn't matter. It's up to you. Is that clear? Do you have any questions?
No questions, so I think we're clear. We can try to draw the maps, and then we can discuss. Okay?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yes.
sorry.
No worries.
Stuff. Here is another figure where we this time use the regional climate model. So now we can easily see the, I don't know, can you see my arrow cursor on the
Yes,
screen? But here we can see the middle Danube basin, and here the lower Danube basin, and also the main mountain ranges around the Pannonian Basin. So we think that these colors now make more sense than in the global climate model. Okay?
Yes, exactly. And for example, I think one of you, Miriana, is doing a PhD on irrigation. So you can see that, if this figure was not temperature, but precipitation, you can see how the pattern that's much better represented in the regional climate model. So if you need input for looking at irrigation, for example, you want something quite precise, and the regional climate model would be better than the global climate model in this case. Yeah,
I think that Branislav will show you now the second subtask of the task 1. So we changed the global climate model input.
yeah,
and we managed to get the figures ready.
Yes, sir. Is everything all right? Can you all hear me?
yes,
I suppose yes, right?
Yes.
Hello, yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so this is the regional climate model we used, the data input. So as Milica said, this regional climate model is more precise, and we also can see more precise data regarding the Serbia and the Pannonian Basin, and also Europe in general, whereas in this global climate model, the data is more robust and rudimental, and the temperatures maybe do not depict precision as they should be.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess if you come back to the regional climate model and you look at Scandinavia, where I am, sorry, there is an echo, but you can see the mountains. In Norway, we have a lot of mountains, and you can see them really well. If you just come back one figure before. Yes, exactly. So if you look at the western part of Scandinavia, can really see that you have lower temperatures due to the mountains. Oh, sorry, I can hear it's a big echo. So yeah, so you can really see that the mountains, for example, are really clearly represented here, while before in the global climate model, because it's more like a block, it's more complicated, and the mountains in Scandinavia are not that high, so it's a bit harder for the global climate model. So I'm not saying we should not use global climate models, but you can really see here that regional climate models have some advantages for the fine scale representation of model. Yes,
you.
I can tell you. I saw the question in the chat. So, for example, I mean, they look really inaccurate now because also with the scale I put, you see a lot of differences. But for example, if you look at temperature, it also depends on the variable you're looking at. But if you're looking at temperature, often it's still a variable that is quite well represented. And when it's flat, you know, if for example, if you look at France in the middle, you have the Alps, but if you look at the center of France, maybe the regional climate model and the global climate model won't be very different, because you don't have mountains, you don't have complex topography or complex land use. So for a variable like temperature, that is quite easy for model to represent. And when you don't have topography, using a regional climate model that is really expensive computationally is not necessarily valuable. So, you know, again, when it's a very easy setup, you might use your global climate model instead of a regional climate model. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
I'm sorry, we have technical problems with the sound and microphones in the room. It's a bit complicated, but we should all wear our earphones, whatever it is. So that's the idea. So and should we continue with task 2 or?
Let me check one more thing. I need to, yeah. I think in task 1, you also have other potential tasks. You can look at other variables also if you want to. I'm double checking, but I think you still have some additional tasks if you want.
Yes, I think that maybe we should look precipitation. If you have the files ready, we can use them. I have some files, but they're on another computer to share with everyone. If you can just put it in a shared folder, we can download it here and use it.
Wait, normally I had put everything in the shared folder, but yeah.
Okay.
But check, yeah. Let me check again.
We have precipitation. We have precipitation for the task 2, and we can use but it's a regional climate model, yeah, not a global.
Oh, sorry. I guess for this one, I put the other variable was maximum temperature.
Mm-hmm. We draw the map, reaction to the map with the maximum temperature.
Okay. So in this case, I think we can go to task 2. I mean, we'll finish much sooner today, but it's fine. It's a weekend soon, so it's fine by me.
Okay, maybe we can have a short break and then go to task 2, or we can have another discussion with the regional global climate models and possibilities for use in their own research, maybe. Maybe because you have a few. Mirjana, for example, is doing geospatial analysis for the planned development of irrigation in Vojvodina. So Vojvodina is a small province, and maybe some downscaling techniques for precipitation.
Great. This was a nice journey Okay, here we generate three graph, actually models for precipitation. And on these three pictures, we can see the difference between the models, actually the variation. So I think we gained good results with this exercise. So that's what I can say for this. And actually, I can conclude that with this third model, we can see more variation between the precipitation data. So from my point, I will choose this third one.
So can you tell me, do you know why these models are different? Because they're trying to represent the same climate, right? The same period, same climate, but they are different. Do you have any ideas why it's like that?
I think it is because actually we learned that every time when we run our model, we will got different results. But if we want to use this data, we have to generate some mean values from these three models and then use that data for some kind of research, if you ask me that.
Yeah, so that's part of the answer. If you take an individual regional climate model, yeah, each simulation can be a little bit different. But in this case, we have three different regional climate models. So the main difference here is that even if we all try to represent the same climate, the physics, you know, like the algorithms that are in the climate models are a little bit different. So I know one model will represent clouds or precipitation in a way that will be a little bit different from another model. And also, as we have seen this morning, regional climate models use input from different type of global climate models. So that's where also you can get some differences. So yeah, you have this first intermodal variability, just because models are a little bit different, and then the input from the data. So, but what you said is true also. Just the model has also inside its own life. Yeah, maybe we can look at temperature.
Can you see?
Yes,
Can you hear me?
yes, I can.
Yeah, oh, sorry.
It's okay.
Okay, here we have again three figures, and we can see that the color shades are a bit different as we scroll from the first to the third picture. And again, I could say that probably the best would be to combine and calculate some mean values from all of these maps. And again, I want to ask you, can we calculate these mean values now? Are we able to do it now? Because it would be nice to combine these three results.
Yes, so first, yeah, I agree. It's better. That's why we usually look at multi-model ensemble. As you say, it's better to combine the models together. And yes, I guess need to modify a little bit the script, but it's totally feasible. I will look at the script and we can. I just want to add one more thing, is that I don't know if you've seen it, but temperature is easier for models to represent than precipitation. Just because temperature is just easier to represent in a climate model, while precipitation depends on so many different things, as you can imagine, mountains, clouds, whatever. It's very complex variable, so it's harder for model to simulate precipitation than temperature. Just a side note, but I can look at the script quickly and put you some notes in the chat, and I think you would be able to derive the average of the three models. if you want. Let me put a few notes in the chat.
And is it okay if we use CDO for merging the documents, not documents, but the outputs?
Yeah.
And maybe it would be easier for us than converting the code.
Yeah, no,
Because
that's
like
what,
5 minutes to do that in CGO. I can do it and then share the file with the map.
great, perfect.
Actually, I should have changed this into me, but this is something I'm just going to help others with them.
Yeah, perfect. So I guess what typically the next step, what you do after doing this mean, you would compare this mask with maps, not mask, with observations and reanalysis. I mean, we won't do that today, but that's exactly what you would do then, is to compare with observation.
Okay. Okay, I hope we are doing some progress now. It's actually I managed to combine two software, CGO and Python, in one day. So that's progress for us.
Well done.
So okay, we can wait for just a few minutes for students to finish with drawing the map, and then we can go on the next level.
Yeah, I don't know how you want to proceed. I've prepared a few slides to do a summary of what we have seen in the different tasks, and then we can discuss that. And I also included a few slides on some projects we are CICERO using regional climate model output. But I mean, it's just a basis, because if people want to share what they are doing and maybe ask questions about dynamical downscaling for their PhD project, that's also really fine with me. So I just included some material, but it's really as you wish. So yeah, I can start maybe with the summary of what we've seen with the 3 tasks, and then we can see where we go. So I guess, and you'll have these PowerPoints. I will put them in the little shared folder, so you can keep that. So I think the first task, when we looked at the output from the GCM and the regional climate model, basically what I was trying to show you, and what I said in the lecture earlier today, is that regional climate models are able to simulate much finer details. So they are particularly useful in regions where you have, for example, a complex terrain, and you really see the impact of your when you simulate precipitation or other variables. But global climate models are still useful when you are maybe in a flat region looking at temperature. So there are still there are still moments where you would still use a global climate model, because it's less computationally expensive, and you would still get the same type of answer. And then in task 2, we have looked at the output from several regional climate models, because I was trying to show you the limitations of regional climate models, because of course they are great, they give finer details, they give you more complexity, so that's really useful. But I just wanted to show you that you need to be careful when you use them, because you can, I mean, it's not the best to use only one of them. It's better to use, as someone said earlier, maybe several of them and do an average, or at least see how different they are, and yeah, how much how much of a differences you will see between the models. And these differences can be even worse when you look at other variables like snow or precipitation, because these variables are quite hard to represent. But again, I've put that here, and for the differences between the simulation of temperature and precipitation, I put a link to explain a bit more why it's that difficult for models to simulate this variable. And then the last task was really an opening to link what we have seen today on dynamical downscaling to extreme events, and in this case, to look at starting to look at indices, to look at heat stress. And I just wanted to show you that if you want to look at an event, it's good to think about different indices and not only one. And it's interesting to compare, of course, the future and the current climate, but you can look at the whole range of scenarios. I've only put one today, but you can look at very different scenarios, more pessimistic or optimistic. But yeah, I mean, it's just opening. You can do many more things once you have this script. So it's up to you to do more. And I guess, yeah, yeah, it was just the figures. But yeah, that's all I have for this part. But then it's just example of a project we have at Cicero, if you want to talk about it. But maybe yeah, you have questions. Or I can stop sharing for. Oh, no, not for. Stop sharing. Oh.
There was actually one question.
Yeah.
I was asked if there are any models, for example, that give better estimations for one region and the other for the other region. So if we combine those models, will we make a mistake?
It's a very good question. And it's a very good question because, as you can imagine, some models, I mean, let's say, I'll take the example of the French model. It's developed in France, and we know a lot about the processes over Europe, let's say. So, of course, originally, I think when some parameterization, so parameterization are this algorithm for representing different physics in the model. And yeah, of course, we have thought about maybe processes that are in Europe, or we have more observations, maybe also over Europe. So of course we can be a little bit better over Europe, even if, I mean, hopefully it will be less true over time. But that's true that the Australian model used to be a little bit better over Australia, at least for tropical cyclones. I remember seeing that. So that's why it's good to have a whole range of models, and not only, not only one. Of course, if you take two, that's not, yeah, as you say, it's not great. But also, there might be better, no, there might be a little worse in one variable, but maybe not the other. So it's quite complex. But that's why, yeah, it's better to, it's a very good question. It's better to combine as many models as you can often. And sometimes you will see really an outlier, a model that is completely out. And of course, you can not take this model, take it out, because it's really not behaving the way it should be. But yeah, then you still have a large range of models, like using Eurocordex, for example.
Thank you. And we have one question in the chat.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think the more observation you have, the better it is. That's what I didn't say it before, but for example, we have much better simulations over Europe compared to Africa, because even if we are doing climate simulations, we need observation to validate the models and to understand what's going on. And over Europe, our network of observation is great, but maybe over Africa, it's not as good. So for example, if you have paleo data, I mean, any type of observation, I think is useful, because you can check a little bit how your model is behaving. Is it behaving correctly? And so, yes, yeah, I think modelers in different parts of Europe could use it. Yeah, so yes, of course, it's better if you have several points, but sometimes so for example, I work on snow sometimes, and we work sometime in Norway, we have 2 stations for, a specific variable, and we still look at these stations. And I think it happens often for paleo data, where of course you don't always have the whole globe. You have data in one forest for dendrochronology, or you have it in several points, and you test your model there. So yeah, I mean, it would be better to have a lot of paleo data, but I think we use what we have, and especially maybe you will be able to use this paleo data at one point and combine them with other paleo data at other points. So it's part of I guess larger ensemble of observation sometimes. So I guess I just wanted to show you a little bit. I mean, today we've been more seeing what you do with the outputs of the climate models directly, when you only look at the climate, but you can actually use these outputs in other models to look at other questions of impacts. And for example, in the past few years, we have been working on a project looking at the impact of climate change on agriculture in India, in the Indo-Gangetic plain, and that's one of the biggest region in the world for wheat production. And so, yeah, we've used the output from a regional climate model to look at the input, to look at the impact on agriculture. Next slide, please, Carly. So, yeah, that's the Indo-Gangetic Plain in India. So it's, yeah, lying between the plain in India and the Himalayas, the mountains. And yeah, well, I guess it will be, you can click, yeah, thank you, click on all of it. And yeah, I just wanted a little bit of context that Indo-Gangetic Plain is providing 40% of the food of the Indian population. So it's really important to look at how climate change is impacting agriculture for this region. And we were also particularly interested in looking at the direct impact of climate change, so via changes in temperature and precipitation, but also thinking at indirect impacts. So for example, when irrigation is limited because of climate change. So for example, if you have less precipitation, or if it's precipitating in a different way, or if you have drought, or if the snow is not coming or melting differently, irrigation will be changed and you might have less opportunity to use irrigation. So that's an indirect impact of climate change. So in this case, we used a regional climate model, WARF, to provide some climate data, temperature and precipitation, to go in a crop model. So where we could look at wheat yield, so the production of wheat in the region. And the model is called DSAT. Next slide. So yeah, as I said before, so you look at climate change, how it's impacting the environment. So you're trying to look at how temperature and precipitation will change in the future, and you will look at mean temperature, mean precipitation, extreme events, so everything related to how the environment is changing in India. Next thing. And for example, here you can see that in the future, this region will be warming a lot until 4 degrees Celsius. And that's just an example, but you also have quite important changes in precipitation too. But it's precipitation, so it's less linear. You can be, yeah, it's more heterogeneous, so it's more complicated to look at precipitation. Yeah, so we see a slight increase in precipitation, but it really depends on which month you are looking at or which season. Next slide. Yeah, next thing. So when you look at the direct impact of climate change, just looking at the impact of changes in temperature and precipitation, we see a decrease in wheat yield from -1 to -8%. So, I mean, it's not nothing, but it's not huge either, because you could think that some of these changes could be compensated by adaptation, for example. And you also need to account for the model uncertainty. But then, next slide, you can look at the indirect impact of climate change. So thinking about how climate change will impact water availability and limit irrigation. And then, yeah, you can click one more time, Carly, sorry, I'm making you work a lot. And then the decrease in wheat yield go from -4 to -36%. So farmers in this region could lose up to 1/3 of their production. And that's a lot, and that's much more complicated to compensate from irrigation, from adaptation. So I guess this example is just to show that you can do a lot of stuff with those climate model outputs, but also like looking at climate change is very complex and complicated, and you need to include this complexity. And usually when you include this complexity, you also see a much higher impact of climate change. And next slide. Yeah, so that's just a summary of what we have seen. And then I have another project where we go one step further. So I can just show you that. So in this project, we use exactly similar tools. We have climate data, crop models, but then we included an economic model. So you can even go one step further, and the climate data and the crop model data can go in an economic model. And then you want to see, in this case, how climate change will impact worker productivity. So it's not only about crop yield, but it's how people are affected by heat stress and then are not able to work outside, because of course it's not only about the crop, people are taking care of this crop. So one step further. So yeah, in this case, it's not regional climate model outputs, but it's nearly the same. And you can go from global climate data or regional climate data to crop model and to economic model. And one more. Yeah, and that's the economic model, but I guess we can go one step further. And here, I mean, I didn't, should have chosen the best figure, but I just want to show you that so the change in GDP, so GDP is the economic impact. And in orange, you can see like if you include the heat stress productivity, the impact of heat stress on worker productivity, the GDP goes down a lot because the impact of climate change on people is really, really important. So it's just an example to show you that you can do a lot of stuff with the climate models, but you can also associate it with other models and do even more than just looking at the climate data themselves. And next slide, and I think that's, as just a summary, and I guess that's two examples that I had, but yeah, there are many other examples that we could show with convection permitting or different things. Maybe you can stop sharing, Carly, and thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, just reading the chat. Do you have other questions or feedbacks or whatever?
No questions in the chat, and nobody's actually speaking up, so I think we are good with questions. Sorry?
No, that's all I had for today, but yeah, I just wanted to say that I left my email, so and next Monday, Carly will be giving the lecture, so you know, if you want to contact us, don't hesitate. And also I should say for Carly, don't be late on Monday, because it's if you miss the beginning, it's really hard to follow the rest of the task with the tool. So
if somebody misses the beginning, we will try to send the video, the recording of the first part during lunch, so they can understand what is happening. But we will ask everybody to be on time, and hopefully they will be. They're always on time. They have been until now, so we will see.
No, it's just to warn you, because we've done it, and I looked at it's a very cool exercise, but it's a bit difficult to follow it if you are not there at the beginning.
Okay,
thanks.
Thank you, Anne, for today. It was a really, really nice day. I enjoyed doing the exercises and I enjoyed the presentations. Thank you, Carly, for saving us at the end of the day with the presentation. Thank you all for staying until the end of this workshop, until the end of the day. We have seen some interesting things and we learned something interesting. And thank you for the scripts that you shared with us that we can use in the future and to maybe produce some new results and something interesting.